Coming to you entirely pre-recorded and entirely on my own here at the Garage of Solitude in Whitestone, Queens. I'm Mario-Francisco Robles, and this is episode 177 of the Fanboy Podcast. How's everybody doing out there? Yes, I'm going to be flying solo for today's episode and for the foreseeable future because you see, when this episode comes out on Friday, March 3rd, that will be one day before Brett Miro becomes a daddy. That's right. Brett and Jesse will be having their baby on March the 4th. That is the new plan. The baby's arriving on Saturday. So clearly he's going to be a little busy. He's going to be a little indisposed for a little while. So I'm going to hold down the fort solo here for a while, which is fine. I kind of did the show by myself for like the first 140 episodes or so. And see, I'm adding these wonderful sound effects. Did you hear the car starting up outside of my literal garage? I guess my neighbors are going for a ride at this late hour of the night. But look, okay, I have not given you all the show in about a month. And rather than bore you with excuses and explanations, I decided I'm just going to go ahead and dive right into a show. You deserve a show. If you've been a long-time subscriber or a new-time subscriber, if you just found me over on the Twitter, since I have been dedicating a lot more time and effort to the Superman on Film Twitter account, if you're one of the new people who's found me of late, thanks for joining in on this on the Fanboy Podcast. And if you're a long-time watcher, listener, viewer, whatever you want to call yourself, supporter of any kind, thanks for your patience as I occasionally have to kind of fly off the grid for a little while every so often. But you know what? Can't complain too much, right? I don't have ads on the show. This is really just a labor of love. I don't get to do this. There's no grand agenda here. This show exists because I love to talk about this stuff. And it seems like some of you like to hear me go at it. And now I've got Brett to do that with. So the whole thing is just a labor of love for the two of us. But every once in a while, there will be a lapse in shows. I will endeavor to be better about warning you when it looks like we're going to need to take a little time away for some reason or another. But for now, like I said, I'm going to dive right into the show. Not too much of a preamble today. I want to dive right into our Superman on Film update for March 3rd, 2023. So since the last show, there's been plenty to discuss. James Gunn continues to say all the right things. For now, he's strictly just the writer of Superman Legacy. We're still, and I'm going to get into the directing situation in just a little bit. But as of now, James Gunn, the writer and co-head of DC Studios, continues to just say all the right things whenever given the opportunity in an interview or in a Twitter exchange to just show the proper love and respect for Superman and talk about the kind of depiction we're going to be getting in Superman Legacy. He just, so far he knows exactly what to say to have me going, all right, yes, we've got the right person for the job. But also, since he is rather prolific and rather busy on the Twitter as of late with debunking rumors and shedding light on certain things, I'm going to catch you up on a few of the key things that he's revealed via social media over the last couple of weeks. Things that I think, if you're looking forward to Superman Legacy, things that I think you should know about. So first of all, how far is he into the script, right? Because we only found out in mid-December when he was giving Henry Cavill the sudden axing that he gave him. We found out in mid-December, that James Gunn was writing a Superman reboot featuring a younger Superman than Henry Cavill would have had to have played. And short time after that, we found out that he had already been working on it for a while. So it wasn't like a thing he had just been asked to do as part of the co-head of DC Studios bit. No, he'd already been working on a script. So we didn't really know how far along into the process he was, but he recently asserted via the Twitter that he is indeed very far. You hear that? Very far. And that goes hand in hand with the fact that he revealed over on the Twitter about a week or two ago that he had actually been asked to do it a few months before this thing had been announced, that his project had been born before the Henry Cavill thing. He gave a timeline of about 5 or 6 months, I believe. And he gave that timeline in early February. So that means he was asked to write Superman Legacy somewhere in like July or August. And as you may recall, it was September when Dwayne Johnson and Henry Cavill and all of that campaigning happened to add Henry Cavill to the end of Black Adam, as well as try to greenlight a Man of Steel 2 sequel and all that kind of stuff. So that came the first week of September. But by that point, James Gunn had already been hired to write a reboot of Superman. So, by the way, imagine his confusion, imagine his flabbergastedness to have been asked to write this movie, to agree to write this movie, and then you start hearing that, oh, but Henry Cavill's also making the rounds, shooting cameos for Black Adam and The Flash and possibly Aquaman. I don't know how many things Cavill got to shooting there in that first week of September when he flew to California to be inserted into several upcoming DC films. But regardless, he was, James Gunn was rightfully sort of blindsided by that, because here he is writing an all new take on Superman, kind of restarting the mythology, giving a reboot, a proper disconnected reboot that exists on its own of anything that has to do with Henry Cavill. And as he's starting work on that, Henry Cavill gets announced for some sort of pseudo return. All the while, he's been having conversations with Peter Safran and, of course, Mr. David Zaslav, the head of Warner Brothers Discovery, about the direction that DC should take, talking to him about the biggest story ever told, talking to him about how we should go about reinvigorating and reinventing the DC brand, all while trying to initially help David Zaslav find the head for DC Studios before he ultimately took the job, as we know he did. So, in terms of like the timelines here, it looks like he's been working on this script since the end of the summer, and he now claims to be very far into it. So, and remember, he did say once that casting does not begin on his movies until the script is complete. So if he's very far, that means that maybe we're not too far from casting. He also mentioned in a fan question, as part of a response to a fan, I should say, someone asked, should we be expecting any casting details in these next 6 months? And 6 months is an interesting bit of timing to be asking about, because when you ask about 6 months and you're in February, you know what that means? That means July. That means August. That means end of summer is within that 6 month time range. And what happens traditionally at the end of July? That's right, San Diego Comic-Con. So it's kind of got me wondering if we're going to get an epic DC Studios Hall H presentation, where maybe he'll unveil some of the major castings right then, along with some of the directors for some of these upcoming projects. So the fact that the script is very far along could mean that casting is on the horizon. And the fact that he says we're going to get some casting announcements within the next 6 months, that tells me that maybe we're going to have ourselves an absolutely epic San Diego Comic-Con this year. So let's see. He also went into a bit of rumor debunking. There was a little bit of rumor mill cleanup that James Gunn has had to do. For starters, this whole bit with Superman Legacy, the title Superman Legacy, has had people going down all these different theoretical rabbit holes. Okay. On the last episode of this show, I talked to you about how a lot of people were assuming Legacy had to do with him being dead. But I talked to you about how the fact that Legacy is not just dead, and it doesn't necessarily mean dead. It just means you're considering the impact you're having on the world around you. What is the legacy that you're building? What is it that you're going to do to leave your mark? And just what mark are you leaving on the world? That is your legacy, and you don't have to be dead to be creating a legacy. Okay. So, yes, that was the rumor back then, that maybe somehow his death was going to be factoring in, especially because he keeps mentioning All-Star Superman, which we know is a story where Clark is dealing with his mortality. He thinks he's going to be dying because of something that happened early on in the story. So that was the theory. And I pointed out then that I don't think there's any chance we're dealing with a death situation in the first movie, unless he's trying to out Snyder. It's like, okay, oh yeah, you want to kill him off in the second movie? I'll kill him off in the first one. Take that, Snyder. No, I don't think he's doing that. So yeah, so no death, no death. But the other thing that people took away from Legacy was, well, maybe he's going to have a child, right? Because in the comics, the super family has kind of expanded, just as the Bat family has become more of a prominent fixture in the Batman lore of late. The idea of Superman and Lois having kids, and Connor and all this stuff, and even in Superman and Lois embracing the idea of Superman the family man, Superman the father. Some people wondered if maybe that's the real story, or maybe Clark is going to be a little older and this is about his child, right? Well, a couple of things got debunked in these last few weeks. First of all, James Gunn came right out and said, I never said anything about Clark Kent having a child, because some fan had made that assumption and accused him of, like, you know, if he's going to be older and have a kid, you could have brought Henry Cavill back, blah, 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 blah. And Gunn kindly responded, I never said he has a kid. So that tells me there's no kid that we have to worry about here. And also a specification on the age, because, and this actually came from the Hollywood Reporters, which goes to show you that even the trades, even the most respected, the biggest publications in all of entertainment, they cannot be trusted right now, because James Gunn and Peter Safran still seem to have all the key details under lock and key. So when the Hollywood Reporter came out and said it looks like Clark Kent is going to be about 25 years old, well, the polygraph came back, and the results, as it turns out, that's a lie. James Gunn said over on the Twitter that, people keep repeating this thing about 25, but I never said that. Okay. We just know that he's younger and that he's not in his 40s, but 25, that is some arbitrary number that somebody along the way cooked up and put out into the world, that's what they expect the Clark Kent and Superman legacy to be. But apparently the 25 thing is not anything that you should be attached to. In fact, it sounds like he might be a little bit older, because that was something that came up over on the Twitter also, because we have the rumors of a young Clark. And we also have the rumors of Batman, the Brave and the Bold. Well, it's not even a rumor at this point. But if he's adapting the Brave and the Bold, if that's going to be the Batman story that gets told in chapter 1, that's a Batman story where he has a teenage child. That's a Batman story where he already has a fully grown up Dick Grayson who's Nightwing. That's a phase where Batman's already well established in the Brave and the Bold. He's nowhere near the beginning of his career. So people started wondering, well, how old is Batman going to be? If he's got a teenage son, and how young are they going to go with this son? Are they going to actually make it like in the comics where it's like he's a kid that kills people? Or are they going to try to age it up a little bit? But, well, that's where the speculation started to go, that Batman is old and Clark is young, and people started getting all bent out of shape about the fact that, like, oh, so we're going to get an old Batman and we're going to get a young Clark. That's not cool. That's lame for some reason. And Gunn went ahead and addressed that. When talking about the ages, he said, people are speculating about both ages. All I ever said was Superman was younger than in his 40s, and Batman might be a couple years older than Superman. All right, so let's break that down a little bit. Let's break down that verbiage. All I ever said was Superman was younger than in his 40s, and Batman might be a couple of years older than Superman. So that tells me that, and when you couple that with the fact that 25 is apparently out the window, I think maybe we're looking for a Superman who's maybe closer to 30, 30, 31, which kind of is a familiar storytelling area to be finding our Clark Kent. In Superman the movie, he went to the Fortress of Solitude at roughly 18 and was there 12 years, and he came out at age 30 to be Superman. I mean, and I'm not sure how old he's supposed to be in Man of Steel, but I think we determined at some point or other he's around 30. So it looks like once again we're going to find Clark who's at around 30 years old. That's going to be, the Superman that we meet. And again, this is not an origin story. So he's already been Superman. Superman is out there. He's already met most of the key characters in his mythology. So remember, we're hitting the ground running with this story. This is not the beginning of his career. There is already an established Superman in the world when this movie starts, which I kind of can't wait to see, by the way. But if that's the case, right? If that's the case, and he's like 30 or 31, honestly, you could have a Batman who's only about 35. And if you're going to, especially if you're going to go with like the deadly kid, Damian Wayne, if you're not going to adapt him upward and try to, perhaps to try to make it a little more palatable, better than watching a teenager, go at people with a katana, you could see them maybe wanting to make him more like 18 or 19. But that's the thing. If you go with a kid, there's already an established precedent for that. The audiences have already shown they eat that stuff up. First of all, fans and audiences alike loved X-23 and Logan, right? Logan's daughter in that movie. Oh, sorry, the 6-year-old spoiler at this point, but his daughter in that movie, she kills a lot of people, and I don't even think she's 10 yet, or she's very young, and people loved her in that, right? Same thing with the Kick-Ass movies. I think about Nicolas Cage's character, who I can't remember his name now, but it was a knockoff of Batman, and Hit Girl, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, and she was a legit like kid. So that's the thing. If you're gonna go with like an actual kid, where this character is supposed to be 13 or 14 years old, a 35-year-old Bruce Wayne who is still a Bruce in his prime, not an old man Batman by any stretch. You could have a 35-year-old Bruce Wayne who shacked up with Talia al Ghul when he was 20 or 21, training with the League of Shadows or something. There's any number of ways that you could make the timing work. But when you look at it that way, instead of 25 and mid 40s for Clark and Batman, if you look at it more like early 30s, mid 30s, the gap doesn't seem that huge. And in general, I've always been kind of a fan of having Batman be a little older, be the one who's a little more hardened by life and cynical and older and just kind of like set in his ways, to kind of juxtapose against young, idealistic, optimistic Clark Kent. So if there is indeed a few years gap between them, I'm all for it. And especially if it's really just a matter of like 31 to 35, then, anyone getting worried about that just needs to find some more things to do with their time. But yes, and just going back to some of the revelations that have come up of late, he clarified beyond any shadow of a doubt that Superman Legacy was always its own thing. And I just want to reiterate that point once again, because there's been a lot of confusion about the timeline and when Henry Cavill was asked to come back and when James Gunn was asked to write his movie. And maybe he could have, maybe he was asked to write a movie that incorporated Henry Cavill. And it's like, no, just to put that to bed for good and forever. Superman Legacy was a reboot that was requested of Gunn, predating Henry Cavill's sudden return. And one thing about Henry Cavill's sudden return, too, that I just want to hit on really quickly. And I talked about this on the Twitter, but for those of you who don't do the socials, look, The Flash was always set to wipe Cavill out of the picture. Not just Cavill, a number of things. The Flash was always going to reset the DC universe as we knew it. Long before James Gunn and Peter Safran were being considered to lead something called DC Studios, long before this whole chapter 1 and this whole new slate was cooked up, long before any of this, When this movie was first kind of this Flash movie in its current, form has existed since like mid 2019. Okay, it's been like 3.5 years where we have a Flash movie being directed by Andy Muschietti and Christina Hudson. Okay, and written by Christina Hudson, and for most of those 3.5 years, there was zero Henry Cavill going to be factored into that, because the whole idea was, and as has been revealed ad nauseum by now, the studio did not want to move forward with Henry Cavill as Superman. They were done. They were washing their hands of him. They were moving on. They had greenlit the J.J. Abrams, Ta-Nehisi Coates Superman standalone story. They were looking at the Michael B. Jordan, Val Zod story for Superman on HBO Max. They were open to all kinds of new directions for Superman, and Henry Cavill simply was not one of the things that they were looking to do. So for most of the 3.5 years that this movie's been in production, no Henry Cavill ever again is the plan, right? Then, for that brief window from early September, and maybe there'd been negotiations a little. Let's give Johnson a month to beat the drum to try to get Cavill in. Let's say in August is when he made that real big push. Because remember, Black Adam had gotten delayed. I think we're supposed to come out at the end of July. And suddenly they had extra time on their hands, and there had been reshoots. And Johnson was trying to figure out what can he do to make this Black Adam movie click, get it across the finish line, and make it a success after all these years of development time that he put into it. And he had the big bright idea, like, let's finally just push hardcore for Henry Cavill to come back. Walter Hamada is basically out of power. David Zaslav is looking for the new DC boss. He's got Pamela Abdi and Mike. Is it Michael DeLuca? I think it's Michael DeLuca as the temporary stewards of DC, because they're overseeing Warner Brothers Pictures in general. So let me go in there and kind of force my agenda aggressively. Let me throw my weight around as one of the few bona fide movie stars that exists anymore. And so, for a period of maybe 7 to 10 weeks out of the 3.5 years, for about 7 to 10 weeks, they found a way to factor Henry Cavill back in. Okay. From whatever those discussions were in August to filming the cameos in September and giving him like $500,000 to do the cameos, to then the movie Black Adam coming out on October 17th, followed by, Henry doing the interviews and all the other stuff and the big press releases that he's back and yada, yada, and so on and so forth. That all lasted for about 7 to 10 weeks, where they briefly flirted with Henry Cavill returning. And then Black Adam, which is the thing that he was set to be a part of in a major way, because mind you, Man of Steel 2 was taking pitches, but Dwayne Johnson had Black Adam hit. The goal, the very next thing was to now continue with Black Adam 2 in a story that features Superman and features the Justice Society and features all this stuff, the world building, the seeds that he had planted in Black Adam. Dwayne Johnson was ready to go full steam ahead with whatever that was, and it was going to involve Henry Cavill's Superman. So that is the world that Henry Cavill was tied to. And then Black Adam flopped, right? So now the studio is like, well, then if we're not going to continue with the Black Adam stuff, we're not really continuing with Henry Cavill. James Gunn comes in. I was writing a reboot anyway. And unfortunately, our boy Henry got the short end of the stick here. He got the signal from the studio to go out and announce his return. And then he got all this egg on his face when he had to announce in December in no uncertain terms, no, he is not Superman anymore. And I know that there's a lot of Superman fans out there who are rightfully still hurting about that and still trying to, connect conspiracy theories and aim a lot of rage at James Gunn and Peter Safran for all this. And it's just, just to put it into perspective for you one last time, numerically speaking, 3.5 years, The Flash was wiping away Henry Cavill's Superman. For 7 to 10 weeks, they considered it. And then they just went back to the original plan of letting The Flash be the movie that just resets things and introducing a Superman legacy that is its own thing and the start of a whole new continuity, the beginning of the DCU. Okay. Just wanted to break that down for you because there are people, you see these rumors floating around, people get upset that they hear that Henry shot a cameo for The Flash and they're like, I want to see that. How could you cut that? Why would you do that? And it's like, listen, anything Henry shot for The Flash, you have to think about this. Anything Henry shot for The Flash wasn't just, here's a cool scene featuring my Superman. No, it's a tease of things to come. Just like in Black Adam, he showed up at the end saying, we have to talk. All right. It's foreshadowing where we're going next with the story. So whatever they had Henry doing in The Flash, it was to set up a continuation of Henry Cavill's Superman. And as soon as you've decided you're not going to be continuing Henry Cavill's Superman, that's why you have to cut that out of The Flash, you know? And honestly, there's a lot of things getting cut out of certain DC movies that I want to talk about a little bit because, you know, even with Aquaman, I've heard that there have been changes, the whole Batman cameo that we've discussed here on this show, where at some point it was going to be Ben Affleck, then at some point it was going to be Michael Keaton, and then they tested it and it got confusing, and then they went back to the other one. There was all kinds of stuff that's kind of been retooled with Aquaman. And there's even a bunch of changes that have been made to the film that were shot in the fall of last year. So we're talking only about 3 or 4 months ago. They were still kind of retooling and changing Aquaman. And what I think is going on with all of these DC releases this year, aside from the changes being made to the Flash's post-credit scene, apparently, aside from the changes being made to Aquaman, aside from who knows what maybe has been cut or altered from Shazam, Fury of the Gods, I think what they're doing right now is it's a little bit of house cleaning. It's a little bit of maintenance. They are pruning these movies of references of where things would go next. Because I don't think there is a next for any of these. I don't think Shazam is getting a 3, no matter how many kind things Zachary Levi says about James Gunn. I don't think, I don't know. We're going to see. James Gunn loves The Flash. Maybe he's going to find a way to make that work and continue with Ezra Miller's Flash somehow, some way, or Michael Keaton's Batman somehow, some way. But I tend to doubt it. And especially with Aquaman, this stuff where we keep hearing these whispers of Jason Momoa switching characters and going to Lobo, going and playing somebody different now in the DCU. I really think that the DCEU, as we know it, will be perishing and breathing its final gasps of oxygen when Aquaman, The Lost Kingdom comes out at the end of this year. I think this is the end of the road for the previous continuity. And if that's the case, if that is the decision that has been made by the heads of DC Studio, then you have to go to each of those movies and trim out anything that's being set up for sequels. Because now you don't want to get people excited for things that ain't coming. You want to try to make these stories be kind of self-enclosed, make them end their particular arcs. This concludes the story, and now we can move on from here. So just to keep that in mind, because even in The Flash, apparently there was a post-credit scene. See, it's not just Henry that got cut. Apparently there was a post-credit scene that was also going to include Sasha Calle's Supergirl, or Sasha Calle, I'm not sure how she says it, and Michael Keaton's Batman. And that has been changed. That has been cut. That has been altered in some way. And people are like, why? Why would you do that? And it's like, well, they were probably trying to set up a Supergirl movie. And whatever Keaton was saying or doing was setting up that Batgirl movie or whatever it is he was going to do next, whatever sort of, bastardization of Batman Beyond they were looking to do originally after The Flash. So if all of that is now off the table, if we're treating The Flash as a reset and we're treating Aquaman as the unlikely, unexpected final chapter of the DCEU, you have to go through each of these movies with a fine tooth comb and cut out anything that is setting up parts 3 or 2 or anything for that matter. So just wanted to kind of touch on all of that. And but bringing it back now to Superman Legacy, when it comes to who's directing this thing, right? It's been a month since the last episode. When are we gonna find out who's directing it? Because you know what? We still don't know as of now. As of March 3rd, 2023, we do not know who's directing Superman Legacy. And on the last episode of this show, I had shared with you a rumor I wanted you to just take with a grain of salt about who could be directing it. And I had mentioned that I heard Ben Affleck himself was circling the project. And I was kind of thrown off by that, excited by it, but kind of thrown to hear that because I didn't really think he would want to go quite that, just Ben Affleck and Superman to me doesn't seem like the greatest fit, but I heard it was happening. I shared it with you as a possibility, but now kind of here's the latest. Okay, here's the latest when it comes to the DCU and the directing situation as it's been explained to me by some people. Okay, so again, this is more, this is rumor, this is innuendo, this is just stuff I hear, and you could, you could take it with a grain of salt. You could let it go in one ear and out the other. You could store it and wait until the real story comes out a few years from now when we find out what went into all these discussions to launch the DCU. We'll find out one day, one way or another. But the DCU director stuff that I've been hearing is that James Gunn is actually rather keen to just write Superman Legacy. And that's why, by the way, they didn't just announce him as a director immediately because, James Gunn's got a lot of clout now. He's a big name. And when he announced this project, he could have very well said, I'm making a new Superman movie. And in any time throughout all of this, through the initial, through the official announcement that happened on January 31st, throughout any of these interactions he's had with fans, he could have just put it out there. Yes, I am directing Superman Legacy. That would probably garner all kinds of great publicity and headlines. He could do that. It's right there for the taking. And yet it seems like he's been hesitant to just outright say he's going to do it. And even Peter Safran had said when they were speaking to journalists on January the 30th that, and we hope he does it. Like he's still trying to convince Gunn to do it. And the story behind that, according to what I've heard, is that Gunn is more than happy to write the script and he wants to hand it off to someone like a Ben Affleck or maybe even specifically Ben Affleck. But the studio itself, and it's hard to say the studio because the studio is Gunn and is Safran. They are the heads of studio. But apparently Safran and David Zaslav have been major advocates trying to get him to just be the guy. Like, listen, you're already charting the creative course for all this. You're the one who had the idea for how to tackle this Superman story and how to make him, connect with audiences today. We want you to be the one who sort of sets the tone, launches this thing with the first movie, and kind of gives everyone else the blueprint for what the DCU is going to be. So they've been kind of rallying behind Gunn being the man who helms it himself, while he apparently, again, rumors, but he apparently would rather write Legacy but direct the Authority. I hear that's the of the initial projects that are coming out the first couple of years of the DCU. I hear Gunn is really rather keen for his idea with the Authority, which I think he's also writing, by the way. So people have to get used to the fact that there's going to be a fair amount of written by James Gunn's in this DCU Phase One, Chapter One that we're going to be getting. But yes, I hear he would really love to direct the Authority and delegate Superman Legacy to someone else, but it's looking more and more like he's resigning himself to, okay, I'm going to be the guy. I'm going to do it. So the latest that I've been hearing is that he's going to end up in the director's chair for Superman Legacy. When it comes to Affleck, look, there are rumors that just hit the web this week about Ben Affleck directing The Brave and the Bold. And I was asked to touch on that over on the Twitter earlier today. And I'm going to let Jonathan Brady's input kind of seep through me here. Jonathan used to write for me at Revenge of the Fans, and his Batman instincts are pretty spot on. I mean, he was predicting Robert Pattinson for Matt Reeves' The Batman long before he showed up on any short lists. So Jonathan Brady seems to have a good gut feeling when it comes to Batman. So I tend to trust him. But he was saying that really nobody should want Ben Affleck to do The Brave and the Bold. That really, his lane has always kind of been the crime thriller. And The Brave and the Bold is not like a gritty crime thriller Batman world. That the Morrison run that they are adapting really kind of like swings all over the place. There's horror, there's humor, there's detective noir, there's kind of cheeky homages to different eras of Batman. Ben Affleck hasn't quite shown that that's his niche quite just yet. And I can't picture Ben Affleck re-entering the world of comic book movies at a time when he really doesn't have to. He's really done everything he needs to say or do in the comic book space. He's made his money. Homeboy's doing just fine. I do not see him dipping his toe back into the major blockbuster tentpole motion picture comic book movie again to do something he's never really done before. I see him coming in to tell a story that means something to him and that his filmmaking sensibilities seem right for. And as for what I think that could be, I don't think it's The Brave and the Bold. And I know that the rumor is an easy one to conjure up. Gee, I wonder why. Because he played Batman. Of course, he played Batman. So, of course, and he's a director. So why not have him direct the new Batman? I get it. I understand the logic, but I just don't see it. I just personally, the rumor doesn't pass my personal smell test for the same reason where I wasn't really feeling him directing Superman Legacy. I shared the rumor, but deep down, I wasn't too enthusiastic about that. What I could see him doing as I look at the first projects that were announced, and mind you, I can't really comment on like the Authority because I don't know anything about the Authority. I've read a little bit on like Wikipedia, but I've never read any of the books. I don't know if they've shown up in any of the animated DC stuff yet. To me, the Authority is a complete mystery. So I've heard people say it would be cool to see him do that because it's a little more underground and a little this, a little that. I don't know. But I would say that's a possibility. But for me, if I'm choosing where to apply Ben Affleck's talents as a director, and this might be a tough sell because it's not just one thing, it's not just a movie, it's a series. But I'm talking about Lanterns. Because if you recall, James Gunn already kind of made this interesting comparison with Lanterns to being almost like a detective story. And he compared it to True Detective. And he talked about the dynamics between Hal Jordan, Jon Stewart, and how they stumble upon this mystery, and it's scary and it has huge ramifications on the whole universe. But it's really kind of an intimate story about these two lanterns. And I don't know, call me crazy, but I think that would be an amazing place to apply Ben Affleck's talent. A prestigious limited run series on HBO Max, because that is what it's going to be, right? It's going to be a big budget HBO Max series from the creative minds that gave us Watchmen and Doom Patrol. So this thing's already got prestige. It's going to have money. It's going to have a budget, and it's going to be important because apparently Lanterns is the thing that kind of pivots the story. They are going to be the one who like discovers the final clue or the whatever it is of the big threat that is the culmination of chapter 1. So Lanterns to me would be my ideal place to slot Ben Affleck. And mind you, and he hasn't done TV yet. So he might want that challenge. He might be down for doing 6 to 8 episodes of this really awesome science fiction detective story, Lanterns. So do I think he's doing The Brave and the Bold? No. But you know who I heard is like rallying for it, pushing for it, wants it real bad? I hear that the Flash director, Andy Muschietti, really seems to want in on The Brave and the Bold. That's just what I'm hearing. Little birds are chirping. And I hear that that's the one where he's like, Mr. Gunn, that's the one. If you're going to keep me around, put me on that. And he is going to keep him around, by the way, because shortly after that, the Flash trailer hit, the one that came out during the Super Bowl, which I'm going to talk about in a few seconds here. Shortly after that trailer came out, he was like told by a fan or asked by, no, I think told by a fan, like, you have to keep Andy Muschietti as a filmmaker for the DCU. And James Gunn just wrote back, okay. Like, it was just like, I'm going to, it wasn't, it was, yes, it was very clear and very direct. Okay, I will then. So yes, Andy Muschietti looks like he's staying within the house. Okay. And we already know that the writer of The Flash, Christina Hodson, is staying in the house. So in terms of carryover creatives, I could see, and I don't think Hodson would write Brave and the Bold, but I could see Andy Muschietti switching over from The Flash over to that. So that's just kind of my, it's a combination of what I could see happening and what I've heard is kind of the behind the scenes sort of vibe right there at DC right now when it comes to who's directing what. So just to recap, it looks like Gunn will land on Legacy. It looks like Affleck will land on something else, likely The Authority or hopefully Lanterns, and that Andy Muschietti seems to be pushing for The Brave and the Bold. So just wanted to put all that out there. And by the way, before I leave the Superman realm of things, James Gunn, if you're watching this show, which I know you're not, but if you're watching this show as you're writing your Superman story, can you do me a favor? Can you let Jonathan live? This is going to be something I campaign for pretty much from now until we get some real details on Superman Legacy. I want a Jonathan Kent that lives. Can that please happen? Can it? Because I've long said that it's upsetting to me that certain people seem to treat Jonathan Kent like he's the same as Uncle Ben in the Spider-Man story. In every key Spider-Man story, Uncle Ben has to die for Peter Parker to have his big ooh la la moment that I'm going to become Spider-Man now. But in the Superman mythology, it is not a prerequisite. Jonathan does not have to die. And meanwhile, in the 2 different Superman series we've gotten on the big screen so far, he died. They've gone to that well twice already. Let's just avoid it this time. Can I please have a Jonathan Kent that Clark can go back and speak to at the farm? Both his parents, by the way, Jonathan and Martha. I want a Clark who is able to return to Smallville and speak to Ma and Pa. So I will die on the hill campaigning for can Jonathan Kent please live? Please. And in general, I want this movie to do lots of things differently than the previous two did. Just for the sake of like, if you're going to reboot, give me something drastically different. Because, you know, that's one of the things too that like, as the years wear on with like Man of Steel, you know, and mind you, I ultimately came around to like really, really enjoy that movie. You know, I really, I have a soft spot for it now. And I talked about it on this show, how First Flight finally made me cry a couple of years ago. And, you know, it finally happened to where I could see Man of Steel for being a pretty special Superman movie. But it did itself no favors when it came to opening itself up to comparisons to the Richard Donner film and to the Christopher Reeve series. Because A, they didn't have to have Jonathan die. Well, that's a minor one. But B, and this is a big one, they didn't have to open with virtually a paraphrase of the same exact sequence, setting up Zod as the main villain. Like the start of Man of Steel, for as gorgeous as it is, I love the Krypton there, and I will. That's a hill I'll die on. Also, that I wish that Krypton series on Sci-Fi had worked out, and we could have gotten more of like an expansion of just that Krypton. I love that Krypton, but the actual bullet points of that opening, it's step by step a literal adaptation of what we saw in the Donner films. All right. We have the news of the impending demise of Krypton. We have the trials for Zod, who apparently has committed, you know, sedition and done some terrible things. We have him being banished to the Phantom Zone, but not before vowing revenge on Jor-El and his heirs. We have the big emotional speech with Jor-El and Lara to the baby, or in where Lara doesn't seem to want to let go of the baby, but Jor-El has to convince her. Like, this is all the same. I could be talking about either movie right now. It's a little crazy to me. Okay. Both movies open with the same identical structure for how we get to Earth, right? And then we go into Jonathan dying, and we go to Zod being the main boss fight at the end. And mind you, Superman 1 and 2, remember the first one didn't have a boss fight. It just had the earthquake thing, because 1 and 2 were being shot as one long story. So really the culmination of Superman 1 and 2, had Richard Donner been able to complete his two-part opus, which he was shooting simultaneously. But the real conclusion of that initial opus was we were going to start on Krypton and end with, you know, the big fight in Metropolis before they end up back at the Fortress of Solitude. But once again, Man of Steel just truncated that. It did it all in one movie. Rather than having the big earthquake sequence in the middle of all that, we just had Zod and company arriving on Earth way sooner. But Zod is another big issue there, because Zod was not an A-list villain for in the Superman mythology. Richard Donner made him famous. Okay. Prior to 1978, Zod was in the Rogues Gallery for sure. And there had been several different adaptations of him, but there were still many different ways you could go. Just look at any number of other Superman origin stories that have nothing to do with Zod, and you'll see that Zod did not have to be our first villain in this brand new DCEU. And yet he was. So when people talk about like, oh, why are they always comparing Man of Steel to Superman the movie? And why can't people just let go of the Donner films and the Reeve films and blah, blah, blah? Like, well, listen, the first movie went out of its way to remind everyone of those movies. So, of course, they're going to be compared. And that's why with Superman Legacy, I want different. I want different. I want different creative choices. At each different fork in the road, I want them to go a different way. You know, I want a different first villain. I want a different way to handle his relationship with his parents on Earth. I want a different way we handle his relationship with his parents from Krypton. I hope we see some creative choices that are drastically different from what we've seen before. Because so far on the big screen, we've basically seen two versions of the same story play out in the first movie, in the beginning of Superman here. Um, so yes, let's go new and let's let Jonathan live. Let Jonathan live, please. Okay, I'm just looking at my topics here. I think I maxed out our Superman on film update. Yeah, that was about a 45-minute Superman on film update. So how's that? How's that for you? I kept you waiting a month, but there it is. So now we're going to switch over to the Flash, okay? Because the Super Bowl has happened since we last spoke, and the world finally got its first real look at the Flash. And it's interesting too, by the way, right? Because the movie's been in production for so long, right? And under Muschietti and Hudson, like I said before, 3.5 years. It's had a release date for a long time. And I didn't even realize until right before the Super Bowl that this was actually going to be the first trailer, not the new trailer, the first trailer for this movie, which is kind of crazy. It happened in February. The movie comes out 4 months later in June, and this was the first trailer. Because yes, there had been the clips, there had been the thing that we've all seen, right? Us hardcore nerds, us fanboys all know the other thing that was released. But if you'll recall, that other thing wasn't a trailer. It didn't play in theaters in front of other movies. Shortened versions of it didn't air as TV spots. That was just a thing for the fans from DC Fandom. Okay, that there was like that 1.5 minute tease that we saw last year that ends with Barry Allen pulling the cover off, presumably, of the Michael Keaton Batmobile and kind of geeking out. I feel like we've all seen that because we're all in this together. We're all a bunch of nerds who follow this stuff way too intently. But just remind yourself, as I did, that nobody else saw that but us. Okay. Only the DC fans who sought that out and shared it with their friends ever saw that. For the rest of the world, Super Bowl Sunday was the first time they ever laid eyes on this movie. So that I think that in and of itself is pretty crazy. But what a trailer. What a first impression to make. They had to deliver, and they had to deliver hard. And mind you, they did an abbreviated version. I think it's only about a minute and a half. The big game, trailer. But then it kind of, implied that you should go to YouTube and see the full one, which is almost 3 minutes. I think it's like 2:48 or something like that, and shows you a lot more. But as first looks go, the new Flash trailer, I think, is pretty spectacular. It explains its premise in a way that is super easy to grab, especially in a world where multiverses are now becoming more commonplace. Marvel already kind of dabbled in that direction. You have a lot of fans and the general public now who are familiar with the idea of the multiverse and worlds colliding into one another and this and that, alternate Earths. So I thought the Flash did an amazing job right away of really simply stating its case, that that Barry has traveled through different worlds and he's about to risk his life to protect this one particular world. And why is that? Because this is the one world he's found where his mother lives. And like that right there, like that's going to grab people who don't know the Flash, people who don't know this story. They hear that and they go, ooh, that's emotional. That's interesting. I know this because I played it for my mom who doesn't know anything about this stuff. And by the end of the trailer, she was like, she really wanted to see it. But back to the trailer itself. So it states its premise really well. I think the effects look really good considering, we've seen some trailers where the effects look a little wonky and you're like, I hope they fix this before the movie comes out. For me, just almost everything in the trailer looks great. There's a couple of scenes, they got to clean up a little bit, a couple of shots, but I think it looks great. I think it sounds great. Seeing Michael Keaton back as Batman was amazing. Some of the iconic imagery we've already seen with him has me like, I cannot wait to see a full movie with him in it. Like, this is crazy. And then our first glimpses of Supergirl, Sasha Kale, whatever. Um, we find out that basically on this earth, there are no metahumans. He's the only metahuman, and this world is about to be invaded and attacked by Zod. All right, that's our plot here. Okay, Barry has found an earth where his mom lives. There's no metahumans, and the Kryptonian invasion is incoming. Like, that's a crazy premise. I could get into all of that, you know? And in this version of the story, in this world, there is a captured Kryptonian seemingly on some floating lab in the middle of the ocean that Bruce Wayne seems to know about. Michael Keaton's Bruce Wayne seems to know about, and they break her out, and that is Kara. That is our Supergirl. So in this story, she is the one metahuman on that world. Although it looks like we're going to end up with three, right? Because Barry showed up in this world, so he's one metahuman. It looks like he's going to turn the other Barry that he meets into another Flash by trying to recreate the accident that created him. And we're going to have Supergirl. So in this world, we have three metahumans and one old ass Batman. And that's going to be what has to save the day. And I'm all for it. And mind you, there's stuff we haven't even seen yet, right? Because the trailer does a pretty good job of making it seem like the Zod thing is the big third act threat. But I don't think it is. I think they're keeping certain cards very close to the vest here. Because, some of the toys, I don't want to spoil anything, but some of the toys have revealed other characters and or villains who may be appearing in this. So there's definitely much more to the story, but just based on the story they presented, I'm very, very intrigued. I like the tone of what I've seen so far. It looks intense and fun and interesting, and it has some levity, but it doesn't look like it's playing it all for laughs. It's not a comedy by any stretch. So that Flash trailer to me. Oh, and then I have to mention we get to see Batfleck again, and he's in the gray and the blue. We see Ben Affleck not only as Bruce Wayne, but we see him as Batman driving a motorcycle that looks a lot like the Nolan motorcycle. And we see him just doing awesome grappling hook stuff. Like, oh, and honestly, like, that's what makes this whole thing kind of bittersweet for me because I love the trailer. I've gone back to see the trailer about 15 times now. And I don't typically do that. I watch a trailer 2 or 3 times and I lock it in my head and I'm good now. But I've rewatched that trailer a whole bunch of times. And one of the reasons I keep going back is because how bittersweet it is. Because if this movie is as good as it looks, it proves that under new creative guidance, under different creative guidance, these characters, this continuity, this DCEU experiment of the last 10 years, it could have lived on. Because if they were able to make a great Flash movie 10 years after Man of Steel came out that gets people excited about the story, gets people invested in the characters, gets the critics to shower it with compliments, and gets the box office support that it needs, then that means that these characters, this continuity, this world wasn't dead yet. They could have done something from here, you know? And listen, I'm all on board with DC Studios and where we're going and the future. But whatever it was that Hamada was trying to set up to happen after The Flash, if The Flash is great, then we could have continued with these guys. Ben Affleck's Batman, or that version of Batman, could have continued to shine. I think Gal Gadot could continue to shine. I think all these heroes, especially remember, they were considering bringing back Henry Cavill and doing a Man of Steel too, because the Flash would have created an opening for that somehow. And it just, to me, it's like, wow, if this thing hits big and shows that fans are all are still invested and willing to give this world a shot, then it makes it almost a little crazy that now we're just pivoting entirely into something new that has nothing to do with that anymore. You know, the fact that we seem to really be moving into a fairly hard reboot, um, a- as we're getting a movie that proves that these characters still work. Um, it's just it makes it a tough pill to swallow. You know, but we shall see. We shall see if it's as good as it is. If it's as good as it looks, then we're going to have to just accept it as a really wonderful send off for that era of DC. Even though it looks like Aquaman is really going to be the final, the final frontier. Um, because mind you, by the way, we talked about it on the show a few episodes ago about Jason Momoa being super excited about something having to do with Aquaman or having to do with DC. And I was doing some research, and that's when I discovered that he helped write Aquaman, very similar to how Christopher Reeve helped write Superman 4. And what did Christopher Reeve want to do with Superman 4? He wanted to tell an allegorical story about saving the world, and not from some big, scary alien threat, but from ourselves via nuclear war. And that's what Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, was about. The whole thing was like a poem about world peace and doing away with nuclear power and seeing past our differences with one another and realizing that we're all just one and that we should be coexisting peacefully and working towards a better and brighter future. And then the movie ended up, there's lots of reasons that Superman 4 didn't end up being as good as it could have been. But unfortunately, it seems like comparisons for Aquaman 2 are kind of ramping up because, yes, just like with Superman 4, Jason Momoa has had a hand in writing it. And just like with Superman 4, this is going to be a movie about saving the planet, but again, from ourselves. It's going to have to do with pollution and climate change and humankind's destruction of Earth and us trying, the Aquaman movie trying to convince people to cut that shit out and save the planet and respect Mother Earth and not destroy her. Um, so and mind you, there's even this picture that's floating around now that looks like there's a scene that takes place at the UN, which that sounds familiar, right? Superman gave a big speech in front of world leaders at Superman 4, and it looks like in Aquaman 2, you see him standing at a podium delivering some address in front of a bunch of flags to a whole bunch of world leaders. So it looks like the comparisons to Superman 4 are apt. And unfortunately, also, there's little rumors that the test screenings hasn't gone so well. You know, apparently that there are some concerns that the film is not going to be quite up to par. And they're still massaging the movie, filling in the new things that were added to the third act. I hear that they've made some major tweaks to the way the third act unfolds and to the way the villain is presented or the villains are presented. So, as well as I'm sure they're also cutting off anything that sets up a part 3. So, I heard that the test screenings are not exactly going splendidly. But in their defense, I did hear that there's a lot of incomplete effects and a lot of stuff that's still very clearly half baked. We're still, especially when I heard this, when these rumors first started hitting, we were 10 months away from the arrival of Aquaman 2 still. 10 months is a lot of time to tweak and fix things. So I'm optimistically hoping that they're able to figure it out and make the most of it. But some of the early buzz is that Aquaman 2 may as well be called Aquaman 2: The Quest for Peace. And ironically, what was Superman 4? It was the end of an era that ended up being the final Christopher Reeve movie, the final DC movie for a couple of years. And a couple of years after that one came out is when Batman came out. And that did its 4 movies, and that had its own end of an era with Batman and Robin in 1997. So there's lots of these little movies that have marked like the end of a particular chapter of DC on film. And Superman 4 marked the end of the Reeve Superman era. And when it comes to Aquaman 2, it's looking more and more likely that it marks the end of the DCEU as we know it. Um, but that's why I hope it ends good. I hope it's a good, strong finish. I really do. I don't want it to end on a whimper. But speaking of a whimper, Shazam 2 is almost coming. And unfortunately, I can't find the caring. I keep looking around. I don't know where I put it. Maybe it's in my other pants with my car keys. I should ask Jonathan Kent about that. But I don't know, man. I don't know what it is. And it's not for the reason that a lot of other people seem to have. A lot of people keep putting, "Oh, I don't why should I care about Shazam? It's not connected to anything anymore. We're probably not going to get a part 3. It just feels like why invest at all, yada yada yada." I'm like, "No, to me, that's all silly. You should still be able to enjoy a movie regardless of its sequel and spin-off possibilities, because that's just a movie is meant to stand on its own. And if you go to a movie so you could be excited for what the next one's going to be, there's a great invention called TV. That's what TV is for. You watch an episode and then you watch the next episode and you binge that. Okay. And you look forward to the next season when your season is up. That's how TV works. But movies are not meant to be that way. Movies are to be enjoyed for what they are. And if they fit into a grander picture, that's just cool. But if the movie isn't great on its own, then what the hell's it doing there? Ant-Man Quantumania. So yes, Shazam is coming out and I feel nothing. And that's surprising to me because I love the first Shazam. Anyone who was listening to this show back in 2019 knows that. I've always thought that that was one of the better DCEU movies. I really liked the premise for it. I thought it was an emotional, heartwarming story. I liked, to me, it was a good table setter. And now I was looking forward to seeing what they do in a part 2 with a bigger budget, presumably setting up a confrontation with Black Adam and maybe getting Superman involved. I came out of Shazam sort of excited for where we were going next. But then I see this trailer where they're fighting he's fighting these 2 women that aren't from the comics and a dragon. And I don't know. It didn't hook me. The trailer didn't hook me. The TV spots I've seen thus far haven't hooked me. And for whatever reason, I can't seem to find it. I can't seem to find my caring for Shazam, Fury of the Gods. I'm going to go see it because listen, I support DC through and through. Whenever I see those memes about, DC fans online and you see a packed theater and DC fans at the movies and it's like 3 people in the theater, I know that there's a problem with attendance and DC fans don't tend to actually show up and support the brand. And listen, for good reason. The brand has been very uneven and running around like a chicken without a head for years now. So I get it, but that's not my style. For me, if I love the series, if I support the franchise, I'm going to show up. And I've seen every DC movie that's been in theaters over the last, I don't know, 35 years. And I'm not going to stop now. But also pushing me over the edge is my son. My son loved the first Shazam, and every time he sees a TV spot or a poster or anything for Shazam, he makes a comment about how he can't wait to see it. So I'm going to take my 8-year-old to see Shazam, and it seems like it'll be a movie that'll be great for him. So, okay, I think that about does it on my Shazam. And let's see, I have a bunch of topics for you. I'm just trying to see what's worth your time. We're at 1 hour and 10 minutes. So, okay, I'm going to touch on the little thing because it was interesting. James Gunn kind of had to clap back at a fan who called him a liar, called him a professional liar at that. And I only want to talk about this because I have seen Gunn's detractors circulating some old tweets and old quotes of his, kind of trying to paint him out as being dishonest and disloyal and a liar. And the two things in particular were, there's an old tweet where he's asked if he would ever want to run DC. And he said basically, hell no. He doesn't want to do what Kevin Feige does, or what any of these people who run, these whole franchises, these whole series. He doesn't want that responsibility. And the other one is that he didn't want to make a Superman movie, that he wanted to do something. He was offered to do it and he chose the Suicide Squad because he was more interested in kind of, exploring that corner of the DC universe, because that's always been kind of the stuff that's spoken to him. He loves that kind of underground, quirky kind of stuff, the kind of dark humor that you can get into in the Suicide Squad. But Gunn came out and let's see, do I have the quote here? Yeah. He says, neither of those things were lies. I was offered Superman, but did Squad instead. A few years later, I saw how to tackle Superman and took it on. I didn't want to be the sole CEO of DC, but when they came and offered it to me and Peter, I said yes, because I could focus on the creative side. And honestly, I mean, I could have told you all of that just by reading the tea leaves, but that makes all the sense in the world. No, we don't have this arrangement yet in any of these main franchises. You look at Marvel, you look at Star Wars, you know, a lot of it has like one central main person at the top of the food chain, right? Marvel has Kevin Feige. Star Wars has Kathleen Kennedy, even though she seems to be delegating a lot to Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni now. But this arrangement of, we have two co-heads, and one is the creative end and one is the business end. That is a game changer. If you're James Gunn and you really just want to be focusing on what are the stories we're going to tell, what are the characters we're going to present, how are we going to present them, what is the big overarching plan? Like, he wants to focus on that stuff, not the nuts and bolts of running a film studio, because there's a lot more to it than just the fun stuff. The everything Gunn is into is the fun stuff. It's the creative stuff. This is what you dream of doing when you're a filmmaker growing up, and when you're a kid growing up on comic books and cartoons, and you're dreaming about the stories you'd get to tell one day. That's the stuff that Gunn wants to focus on. And it's perfect because now he's got Safran, who could focus on all the other stuff. Honestly, I can relate to that. I've been in work situations where it's like, I'm an idea man. I'm a creative man. I belong in front of people, kind of telling a story or sharing something. I'm not someone who's good at like running a business and having rules and deadlines, and I have to fill out paperwork, and I have to that's never been me. That's never been my world. Just let me create and let somebody else take care of the serious work. And it sounds like Gunn was offered that and snatched it up. So earlier on, when he was asked, if he would want to run the studio, he said no, because the implication there is he would be fully in charge for everything. And that's not his bag, baby. But him with Safran, that makes sense. And the thing with Superman is, listen, at the time that they offered him that too, that was in like 2020, where everything was still in a state of total limbo. And he probably didn't even know which Superman they would want to make. Maybe he didn't at the time, but now with some time to think about it, and now as a creative type figuring out the way to tell his story, now the stars aligned and he's doing it. That's not a lie. It's a change of heart. So people just have to, take long walks off short piers and just grow up a little bit, please. Liar, professional liar. Anyway, so a couple of things that came in from you all. I've already kind of addressed some. I asked on Twitter earlier today. I had asked if anyone had any questions or threads for me that they wanted, topics they wanted me to tackle on the show. One of them had been about Ben Affleck and directing The Brave and the Bold. So I already touched on that. And one of the other things here that came in was about Metropolis. When it comes to Metropolis in Superman Legacy, do I think it'll be more of a character in the stories? As opposed to just being just a generic backdrop, just a big city with skyscrapers for Superman to sort of fly around in. And yeah, I kind of would love that. I would love that, honestly. It'd be great if Metropolis felt like a place. Because honestly, I don't think we've had that yet. Because listen, in the Reeve movies, Metropolis definitely felt like a place and it had personality, and we got to hear from civilians and pedestrians, and they defended Superman and all that. But like, it was basically New York City. You know, it had the Empire State Building in the first movie and the fourth, and you had the Statue of Liberty in the fourth, and you have the honking yellow cabs, and it was New York, and they fought in Times Square. Like, Richard Donner and the original Christopher Reeve movies in general made no bones about the fact that yes, we're just treating Metropolis like it is the same as New York. It's just DC's New York. And it wasn't really until Batman 89 where we saw a city that had personality, right? Tim Burton gave us a Gotham that felt like something. It had a mood, it had a vibe, it had a look. There was something distinct. It added its own sort of aura to the story. But after, what came after the Reeve movies, the next Superman Metropolis that we got to see on the big screen was Superman Returns in 2006. And that was a very pretty looking city. There was a lot of interesting architect. I know that Guy Hendricks Dias, kind of designed a lot of like Art Deco, and he wanted to give it kind of like a timeless look. And, it wasn't just straight up New York City. It kind of merged ideas from multiple cities. It was kind of New York. It was kind of Sydney, Australia. It was kind of like various places merged into one mega city. But again, we didn't really feel much of a personality for Metropolis. We didn't really, that movie spent so much time on Superman and his drama with Lois and Richard that we didn't really get to see him interact with the people of Metropolis too much, or to get a sense for what Metropolis was like on the ground level. It was really just a nice looking, kind of retro designed city. But there really wasn't much to it. And then in Man of Steel, I mean, we barely got to see it aside from the craters that were created in it during the invasion of Krypton. And in general, the personality of the city, it didn't really factor in too much in Man of Steel. And in Batman versus Superman, again, it could have been Chicago, it could have been anywhere. There wasn't a huge difference between Metropolis and any other setting that we saw in Batman versus Superman. And then in both versions of Justice League, again, it's just a city, and there's the Superman Memorial Park in the middle of it, but it could be any city, anywhere, at any time. So I don't think we've ever had a Metropolis on the big screen that has a particular vibe and a particular energy to it, and is essentially almost like another character in the story. So for Superman Legacy, I think it would be pretty cool. I think it would be pretty damn cool if James Gunn finds a way to give Metropolis some real flair and some real personality. You really kind of give the context of the story something interesting by setting it in a place that itself is interesting, you know? But then again, we haven't really seen that in a while, right? Like, if we look at the world James Gunn comes from, some of his recent films, none of the settings really matter that much in Guardians of the Galaxy, aside from when he goes to visit Ego and he's on the planet. That planet Ego has a very distinct feel, but that's because it kind of had to be. That was the whole point of that was like, we're on my father. But anyway, so yeah, I don't know that we've seen an example of the setting of the story factoring in very huge outside of another DC movie in Matt Reeves' The Batman. There, once again, Gotham there's a vibe, right? And Matt Reeves' The Batman, there's there's a look and a feel to it. It kind of drapes over everything that happens. So the city is very much sort of vital and alive and part of the story. So once again, we keep getting epic Gothams, but we have yet to get a metropolis that really stands out as being like, oh yeah, this makes sense for why this city would be Superman's home base. Out of all the places he could have gone to operate out of, it makes sense that Metropolis is like the center of the world for him, you know? So yes, and then the last things that came in that I'm going to be able to tackle on the show today is well, Brett, my wonderful co-host. I'm going to miss you. Congratulations on becoming a father. That's coming up tomorrow. I don't know if you're going to hear this the day it comes out. You're probably a little preoccupied, but you actually did answer on my tweet about all this, about questions and topics for the show. So I feel like since you're not here, I do owe it to you to address your questions. So the first one was about advice for fatherhood, since I do have not one, not two, but three kids, including a 10 and a half month old upstairs right now. Um, Listen, my advice is simple. Just try to enjoy it, be present, be in the moment, and bigger picture. If there's things about you, if there's things about your upbringing, if there's patterns and habits that have happened in your life that you don't want to see continue onward into your child, make it your priority to break the patterns. Say that anything bad that happened in my line leading up to me, it ends with me. This child is not going to continue on my cycles and on the things that, they're not going to inherit my flaws, and I'm not going to repeat for them the things that harmed me. So to me as a father, it's always been very clarifying to like catch myself and to be very, very clear and very, very deliberate about the things I want to pass on, as well as the things I want to completely obliterate and not put in their, not download into their delicate little hard drives ever. So, but yes, be in the moment, be present, because everyone will tell you this, but it will fly. And that is one of the reasons we had the third kid, because we have an 11-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. And we're like, where did the time go? My wife and I love being parents. It's one of the most rewarding things in our lives. It's been great raising this wonderful girl and this wonderful boy, and we're like, we want to do it again. So that's why we have this huge gap, 11, 8, and 10 months. But partially that was informed by a feeling of it really flies, man. You're gonna blink and she's gonna be crawling, and you're gonna blink and she's gonna be walking, and you're gonna blink and she's gonna be going to school. It's true what they say. But also, it's not true what they say. Oh, you're never going to sleep again. Oh, say goodbye to sleep. Everyone loves to say that crap. And it's like, no, that's not by default. That's not automatic. So hopefully you'll get lucky. Both of my daughters slept through the night within 2 weeks of arrival on Earth. Okay. The key is keep things calm around them. All right. They can read your energy. They can feel your vibes. If you're stressed out and frantic and upset and frustrated, you're going to have an upset baby. If you're calm and peace and love and patience and you understand the assignment here, then your baby's going to be a pretty chill baby and they're probably going to sleep. So, the other one, though, this was a DC one. You asked about casting for the Lanterns, since that is your favorite DCU project. And Brett, I've got nothing for you. I'm sorry. I gave it thought. And honestly, like, this is where it comes into a problem that we spoke about 2 weeks ago, or 2 episodes ago, I should say, where I was talking about the fact that I really don't see movies anymore. I really need to change that in 2023, and I plan on it. I'm going to go see Creed 3 as soon as that comes out, and I'm trying to see some non-superhero movies. I want to get back to watching movies where the star of the movie is the writing and the acting and the directing, not the way it teases the next big event film that's coming out, you know? I need to go see real movies so I could get to know some real actors and actually have some input on all of these casting ideas floating around. Because with all the DCU stuff, whether it's the Superman stuff or Batman or anything, people ask, for who would you cast? And I see people making all these different suggestions. And listen, I'm firmly still on the Wolfgang Novogratz train here for young Clark. But yeah, I really don't like it's gotten so bad that since I really only watch like superheroes and comic book movies, every actor I think of is already in a comic book movie or a superhero thing. So it's like I'm just going to suggest a different comic book character for them to play. Like that's pretty lame. So I'm sorry to let you down, Brett, but I just need to see more movies. I do not have a Hal Jordan right on the tip of my tongue. I do not have a Jon Stewart right on the tip of my tongue. And anything I would give you, it will just be some stereotypical played out answer, someone who gets casted for everything. Oh, Michael B. Jordan for Jon Stewart, I'm no, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to give it some thought. I'm going to see some real movies, and I'm going to hit you guys all up with some casting picks and choices and fan casts because unfortunately I don't see enough movies to know who's acting anymore. Anyway, so that about does it. That does it for episode 177 of the Fanboy Podcast. I hope you had a good time with me and just me alone. If you'd like to send a question or topic and you're not on the Twitter, please email it to thefanboypodcast@gmail.com. Especially in the weeks ahead where I'm not going to have a co-host, I'm going to be a little hungry for questions and topics. So by all means, keep them coming. I'm going to try to not fall off the face of the earth after this. I'm going to try to commit to being back every Friday again on my own, holding down the fort until Brett can return. But until next time, be kind and stay fanboy. Adios.